Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Level 10 YouTube page. This is not the majority of the team, obviously, but we have Coach John, Coach Tom, and Coach Shelby here, just doing a very informal conversation that might be helpful, might be insightful to give you or to clue you in on some things regarding training and why you may not be seeing the progress that you are hoping to see in your training. So we want to start it off by first describing what we see from a coach's perspective, especially with the three of us doing training programming for our clients, what we see as the biggest issue in terms of why isn't this working, or why am I not further along, or why am I not seeing the progress that I want to see. So the biggest thing that I obviously see, or that I experience, that my clients experience, is going to be from a body composition perspective. They are not seeing the visual changes, whether it be in the mirror or in pictures, maybe even the way that clothes are fitting, that they ultimately expect to see after starting coaching, starting a resistance training program, going to the gym for the first time, or what have you. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can go with that, but ultimately that's what we're going to talk about. It's just kind of like why people struggle, essentially. So any thoughts from the two of you as we get into that, or kind of like the number one thing that we see that people maybe they're missing or doing wrong that is leading to this disconnect or to this problem?
I think an overall big picture thing is that just some, maybe not new per se, but like some people, they just never experience what it, and this isn't to say they're lazy, they just don't understand what true hard work in a gym feels like. And to them, they might have thought they were working hard, but then we actually tell them like, hey, take your set to XRPE or XRIR, and all of a sudden it's like a light bulb goes off and they're like, wow, now I'm working hard. Like that's a true hard set, or that's a truly hard, what a workout should feel like. Oh, wow, I was way off, or oh, wow, I had way more in the tank than I ever thought I did with my workouts. And like, just as an overarching theme, I think like that's a lot of what I'll see is, they use the same weights over and over and over. And then they're like, wow, I never increased the weight, but I never saw any body recomposition either. I never saw a gain in strength. And I'm like, well, you never tried to do anything harder.
Not that they didn't try, right? There's just a disconnect between what
there was a disconnect.
Really
right.
And showing up is half the battle, but you do still have to put in the effort when you get there to put in the effort. And just to clarify, if you don't know what those terms are, the RPE and RIR. RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion. So it's usually on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being like the hardest thing you've ever done. 1 being super easy, you could do that all day. And then RIR is a similar type of scale, just goes kind of in the opposite direction. You're looking at reps in reserve. So how many repetitions you could still do once you finish your set. So say you are going for a set of 10, you could maybe hit 12 at that load. So that's an RIR 2. So just to clarify, for anyone who isn't familiar with those terms.
Yeah, and I also agree, Tom, that that's probably the biggest struggle, is realizing, both from kind of like a psychological perspective, what that effort feels like, but also from a physiological perspective, like what does it actually look like, feel like what does your rep speed do? Like what does actual close approximation to failure training look and feel like, right? Because I think even as advanced athletes and trainees, there's a lot of research that suggests that we're pretty poor at gauging like true levels of effort. And as a personal trainer from the gym floor, Shelby, I'm sure you can attest to this too, like one of the biggest things that I used to see in the gym floor was when I would ask somebody like, okay, if we're going to shoot for 10 reps or something like that, like Shelby said, what weight do you think you should use? And they would immediately pick one that I knew in my head was way too easy. And to show them that, I would say, okay, take that weight and do as many reps as you possibly could. And it would always be like 20 or more. And that's just way too far away from failure. So that's how I like to frame it too, Shelby, is always kind of like somewhere around 2 to 3 reps away from true muscular failure, meaning like you can no longer contract those muscle fibers to move your body through space. Like that's what actual failure means, not this feels heavy or this feels hard. You want to be somewhere within, 0 to 3 reps in reserve.
When I think to go off of that too, it's also understanding that we're talking, like you said, about muscular fatigue, which is incredibly different than just you're so fatigued because maybe you're going incredibly fast, or you're not doing a lot of rest periods, or you're doing all of your exercises in a circuit, which would get you working hard, but is a completely different type of training. We're not hitting the right stimulus doing that. That's more of your muscular endurance. And yes, you will be better at that, but you're not necessarily going to see that hypertrophy gain or body composition change you're looking for if you're just getting your heart rate through the roof and saying, yeah, I definitely worked hard. It's not the same thing as muscular fatigue.
Yeah. Ultimately, again, boils down to big picture, a disconnect between what the perception of effort really looks like, because you can be out of breath, your muscles can be on fire, they can be burning, but you can still be way too far away from muscular contractile failure in order for that to send an internal signal for your body to say, I need to get bigger and stronger, essentially, right? That's not going to drive hypertrophy, which is, the adaptation that most people, they may not realize it, but that's what they want, right? They want to build muscle tissue because that's what's going to lead to visual changes, you looking leaner, you looking, curvier in the right areas, your clothes fitting better, your measurements improving and things like that. That is muscle growth. And fortunately for brand new beginner trainees, you can achieve that stimulus relatively easily without having to work all that hard. And so everything that we're talking about right now kind of like doesn't matter so much. Unfortunately, that doesn't last very long. So that's why, very quickly you can go from, oh, I saw some changes when I first started going to the gym, maybe 2 to 3 months in, you're kind of like Tom said at the beginning, if you're not adding more weight, if you're not challenging and pushing yourself, things just aren't going to change because you're not applying that stimulus or working hard enough. Again, not to say that there's any type of laziness implied there. It's just that the stimulus that we're looking to achieve is not being met, right? So I think that is the first thing that people struggle with. And maybe it starts with kind of like what our experience is with working hard in life. Not everybody grew up playing sports. Not everybody grew up being put in the weight room because of sports in high school or whatnot. And so it's uncomfortable. Like to be quite honest, there's no easy way to say that if you want to train in a way that's going to lead to the change that you want to physically see, it's going to physically hurt. Like that's kind of like the nature of high intense training, close, literally pushing yourself to the point of not being able to move your body through space anymore is in and of itself hard. And that might be, scary and daunting for some people, but that's ultimately probably the biggest reason why people aren't seeing the change, because they're not taking it there, so to speak. So do you guys have any kind of like, once I see a client get to this point, or when we identify that this is the main struggle, how do we fix that? What's the next step, or like, what are we doing?
That's exactly what I was going to say. So what we should talk about is, okay, so if you think that's you, like, what do you do? Right. So what John mentioned earlier with what he did with the client in the gym is something that you can apply to yourself, by grabbing a load that you think is appropriate, aiming for your rep range, but continue to go as far as you can. And if you can do, 5, 6, 7 plus more reps than what you are intending to do, you need to go up and load. That's kind of an easy way to identify it. And now you shouldn't have to do that 3 or 4 times where now you're hitting muscular fatigue just because you've done too many reps, but you can make appropriate jumps. And also, I think just remember that it does take a little bit of time and like finesse of understanding your body. So the first couple times you do it, you may have to guess 1 or 2 times and you're like, that was maybe too light. That was definitely not enough. But once you get that rhythm, start tracking the loads you're using so that you know what you should be aiming for, that it should be higher. Or if reps go down, I should definitely be doing more than I was in a 12 to 15 range. If I'm doing 8 to 10, my load should definitely be higher than that. And so tracking your workouts, kind of another segue, a piece that I think we should probably talk about too, but that will help you gauge how you're progressing and making sure that you are actually challenging yourself.
Yeah, I would say for somebody newer, somebody that's beginning, or they've been dabbling in it a little bit, like you guys said, test what a true rep max would feel like at the beginning of a new block. And then you can base your numbers off of that and then track how you felt set by set by set. So not just tracking the loads you're using, but the reps you had left in reserve next to each weight that you use as well. So you can track, your load, your total reps each set, and how many reps in reserve. You're truly giving yourself like 3 factors then to consider as you move set to set and week to week, as opposed to just the weight you used and the reps you used. Because I could say like, oh, I did 135, 888. But if that was at RIR 5 all the way across, and I only go up to 140 next week, it might still be the same RIR if adaptations occur. You know what I'm saying? So you should keep track of your RIR, because then you could transfer set to set as opposed to just week to week.
And I mean, it may feel like a lot of work to be tracking all of this. I mean, I remember having a couple of coworkers of mine being like, you wrote down how you felt at the end of your workouts. It's like, yeah, like I was tracking that because I wanted to know, like, was this workout a hard effort? You know, how did I feel about it? Weight was heavy, weight felt like crap, I slept like crap. Those things can make a difference too. So tracking all of that stuff through will definitely help too.
I mean, I think tracking or logging your workouts in general solves a lot of these problems, simply for the fact that most people don't at all. And so regardless if you're tracking like how hard each set was, or trying to like write down what an RIR or RPE was for each set, as long as you at least know, hey, last time I did this workout, I lifted 135 pounds or whatnot, that at least gives you a baseline to say, I should probably do at least that, if not trying to do more, right? And then that by nature is going to encourage you to start trying to, do what most people realize we have to do, and that's improve over time. So if at the very least you know what weights you've used, what reps you've done before, trying to beat the logbook is the simplest way, and I guess probably the first step we could say to, hey, figure out where your current baseline level of strength or performance capabilities are, and then log them as you go, and then try and make sure that by month 1 to week 4, or month 4 rather, something like that, those numbers have gone up. Like that's the easiest first step, I would say, right? And in terms of like trying to gauge what RPE 10 or like 0 RAR true failure or rep max testing feels like, I think some people might even benefit just from starting with their body weight. Like I know it might be difficult to go pick a set of dumbbells and try and do like bench press or chest press all the way to failure, but get down on the floor and say, I'm going to do push-ups until I literally can't push myself up off the ground anymore. And that's going to at least allow you to feel what failure feels like, and what, like how far you can actually struggle through those grindy reps. And with a movement like that, it's a little bit more stable than say a dumbbell press. And so you're probably going to be able to push harder for longer before your technique breaks down. And so that could be another, segue that we talk about. It could be movement dependent. Maybe if you're not seeing the results that you want to see because you're not physically able to put forth the effort required, maybe it's because you're not skilled yet enough at the movements you're trying to do. So instead of trying to force yourself to grow from a barbell back squat, maybe we work harder, but also smarter by doing the same, or training the same muscles, but on a leg press, because there's more stability. You're able to now train harder without having to worry about like balancing that barbell on your back or squatting to depth, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a CrossFit background, I saw that happen a lot, where the people wanted, clients wanted to do the fun, skilled stuff, like the stuff you see online people doing. And you may be trying to do those things, but it just may not be appropriate for you yet. And it doesn't mean it won't be, but if you scale those things back, like snatches, for example, to this day, I'm like, I will not put a barbell in somebody's hand who's never done even a dumbbell snatch before doing a barbell snatch. Like, it just doesn't make sense. You should be able to master a goblet squat first and then move to that back squat. And it doesn't mean that you're not working as hard, but it's just like anything, you have to start at where you're at and start at the appropriate level, get to a challenging load, make sure that, hey, I've mastered this, then you can move on to those harder exercises, quote unquote harder, right? It happens a lot in the CrossFit space, but that's for another day.
Yeah, I think touching on just exercise selection would be form, and with form checks with clients, a lot of times if you send in a form check, or if you assess your own form and you realize like, oh, I wasn't even, let's say it's at RDL, I wasn't even hinging appropriately. I wasn't actually, targeting the glutes and the hams like I should have been. It was all the stress was in my low back. Once you fix that, all of a sudden it's like a light bulb goes off, and then those numbers start to go up almost immediately, because you're activating the appropriate muscles, you're performing the movement right, you're using mechanical advantage to your advantage, and you're performing that movement properly. You can really start to take off. And just like you get that mind muscle connection, it's almost like you just take off with your numbers.
Yeah, I would say that's where that, like, choosing an easier, an easier form of that exercise can be the game changer, where all of a sudden you feel it. Like, I've had people do banded like hinging, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, that's what it's supposed to feel like to feel my hamstrings lit up, where they do an RDL and all they think is like their shoulders and upper back are what they're feeling. So if you aren't seeing progress in those areas, take a video of yourself, find a friend who's a coach. Obviously, if you have a coach, you can send those videos in, but talk to somebody and say, hey, can you assess my form? But taking videos yourself too could be very beneficial for that purpose, for sure. And not to be embarrassed about filming yourself in the gym. Everybody does it these days, honestly. So
yeah, that's probably what we should have talked about first, because we're talking about like all this effort, and the effort has to be performed by muscles that we're actually trying to train. Like the effort has to be directed to the right place. The stimulus and tension has to be directed to the right place. Our goal is not just to move weight and to move more weight over time. Our goal is to, from a hypertrophy standpoint, fatigue muscle fibers. And if we're not actively doing that, then we're not achieving our goal. And the way to do that is to perform the exercises correctly through a full range of motion, make sure that you're lengthening the fibers and shortening the ones that you're actually aiming to train. Like Tom said, glutes and hamstrings and a hinge, as opposed to maybe you're moving that entire weight through that entire range of motion through spinal flexion and extension, which is not going to train your glutes and hamstrings. So there would be the light bulb moment. Oh, that's why my glutes and hamstrings aren't growing. I'm not actually training them. I'm just working really hard with my lower back to move this weight, right? So it's also, to see the adaptations that we want to see, we have to make sure that we're checking off the first box. And that's, again, from a hypertrophy standpoint, stimulating and placing tension on actual target musculature. So form, technique, and execution of those movements almost even matters more than effort in general, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and to kind of touch on like for hypertrophy, because I know you keep saying it that way, which I think is important for people to recognize. But if you're looking for body composition change, you do need to have hypertrophy, right? We want muscle size. We're not just saying we want our muscles to be strong. You can be super strong and not actually like look super muscular. Yes, you'll gain some muscle mass because you're lifting, but hypertrophy, if you're not familiar with that term, is us trying to actually grow the size of your muscles so that they are visible. So if you think, oh, no, like my goal is weight loss, like I want to look like I have toned arms and blah, 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 like a lean waist, like good looking butt, everybody wants that stuff, right? Which is great. But like to get a bigger booty, to have the shoulders and arms that look good, like you do have to have muscular size increase. So just so it makes sense, if you're thinking, oh, hypertrophy is not my goal, it's probably part of your goal, even if you think it's not your direct goal.
One way to just, if you want to just like zoom out and like look at somebody, like at two people in the gym, you'll see someone with like 50-pound dumbbells trying to do bicep curls, but they're heaving their arms and their back and they're using their legs, and they're not getting a good contraction of the actual bicep, which if you look at a bicep on your body compared to like your quads, your glutes, like it's not a big muscle. Like even when it's big on people, it's still not a big muscle. It really shouldn't be able to move a ton of weight. So if you watch somebody doing it with proper form of 25s or whatever their ability is, they're probably getting a better contraction of the actual bicep, which is going to provide more of a stimulus than the guy doing heaving 50s. This is a general concept. There are like cheat curls and things like that, but that's not for this time right now. So.
Right. Again, the simplest way to think about it is your goal is not just to move as much weight as physically possible. Your goal is to challenge the muscle tissue that you're training. And so you do have to be aware of those muscles' actual physical capabilities. And that also ties into the way that you would, structure your programming, because you wouldn't intentionally try and do, let's say, super heavy sets of 3 for a muscle like bicep curls, because it's a single joint exercise, because the muscle is so small relatively, like it just doesn't make sense. So the musculature that you're training kind of dictates the exercise selection that you use. It dictates the rep ranges that you train in. And that's why you see people lifting, well, this could be another topic that we talk about, heavy, which is again relative, but if you're going to be doing squats, then that might make more sense to do heavier sets, to do 3 to 5 reps or something like that. But again, if you're training your quads, that makes sense for squats, but you're not going to want to try and do sets of 3 on a leg extension, right? So we have to kind of be mindful of how we're distributing that effort also.
Yeah, I would say, just from another thing to touch on with that would be, just you going back to compounds, is maybe a reason people don't see progress. You just aren't, obviously our clients, they get our programming, which always has compounds in it. if you're somebody that's just taking a random program off the internet, or you don't know what you're doing and you're putting your own program together and you're not prioritizing compound movements, lower and upper body, like, and you're just doing a ton of isolation work, you're kind of setting yourself back a little bit. It's not that you're not going to see some results, but you can get so much more bang for your buck from a compound movement.
Can you explain a little more of what a compound movement is?
Yes, compound would just be a multi-joint. So your squats, deadlifts, bench press, shoulder press, things like that, rows, multi-joint movements using, so a row would be my shoulder joint and my elbow joint moving at the same time. Squat would be my hip and my knee moving at the same time.
Right.
It is kind of wild to me how frequently that we see new clients come to us who say that they are advanced trainees. And when we ask them, like, okay, well, what have you done in the past? What kind of programs have you done? And we dive a little bit deeper into what that looks like. And like Tom said, a lot of it is like a crap ton of, bicep curls and lateral raises and things that they are doing at home with maybe 5 to 10 pound dumbbells, where it's like that. Not to say that that's, not working hard when you're doing that or putting forth the effort, but in terms of what you're going to get the most stimulus and the most response from, it's going to be heavy compound exercises, not things like a bicep curl. And that should be the bulk of your training program, where the bulk of your effort should go into. And that's why having gym access and availability, or having more weight or more resistance to use can be beneficial. For a lot of people, your body weight will be enough at first for things like squats and deadlifts, for those, compound movements, multi-joint movements. But very quickly, if you're doing it correctly, if you're training hard enough, as those adaptations occur, you get stronger. And in order to keep adapting and to keep seeing the progress that you want to see, you have to progress that stimulus. And if you only have 5 pound dumbbells, 10 pound dumbbells at home, you're probably not going to be able to train your legs all that efficiently, because it's just not going to be hard enough or heavy enough for those compound movements, right? So I think that that's a limitation that a lot of people see training from home, which, I mean, we can work around that in a lot of cases by using some more advanced training techniques. But I think for anybody who's maybe just listening to this, that could be that light bulb moment of, oh yeah, I only have 5 pound dumbbells, or I've only been working out with, my body weight for months and months, or even years. And maybe stepping into the gym is the next, the next answer, or just for somehow having access to more resistance, heavier weights.
Yeah. And honestly, that kind of made me think about how the other thing I feel like we see a lot of is kind of this junk volume training. And that's a term you may have heard before, but just doing so many exercises to say, I worked hard, because by the end of doing 10 exercises that day, yeah, you're fatigued, but that if you aren't working hard enough, where 4 to 6 exercises, maybe you throw a couple core exercises on the end, so it ends up being like 7 or 8, but your main leg day lifts, right? Or your main push day lifts, you don't need to have 8 to 10 exercises with 3 to 5 sets for all of those, because you're not going to be able to efficiently work hard at all of those exercises. You're just not. By the time you get towards the end, you're going to get fatigued. So you're also going to do a lot better cutting down all of that kind of excess like fat on there, and just cut it down to 4 to 6 exercises, work really hard at those. And typically you're going to get a lot better results from that versus, again, just junk volume. You don't have to do jumping squats between everything. You don't have to have 0 rest periods. You don't have to do 10 exercises. You can be really efficient with 4 to 6 and work hard and actually get the stimulus that we're looking for.
Another way to think about that is like, if you can get through 10 exercises and not feel like you got run over by a truck, you probably want to look at your intensity and how much effort you're putting forth into those sets, because I would say on average, somewhere between 2 to maybe 5 exercises per session. By the time you get to the end of that, if you're putting in adequate level of intensity and effort, and you're actually going to 0 to 3 reps in reserve in each one of those sets, you should need 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of rest in between each set. And by the time you get done with that 4th exercise, you should be like, no part of me wants to even consider doing any more, right? Like 10 set exercises just aren't even feasible if you're putting in the right amount of effort.
Yeah.
The most extreme example I have of this is I have a client who's been with me for over a year and change now. And when he came to me, his his sets and reps were 10 by 10 of everything in like circuit
Let's
fashion.
say German volume training.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even German volume. It was just like 10 by 10 circuits. And it was like,
Oh,
he goes, I was using the same weights all the time. And he's like a fit, like what society would deem like a fit person, like trim, a little bit of muscle on him. Like he wasn't like, he wasn't looking to do much, but he was just like, I'm spinning my wheels. I'm noticing like there's not much change happening either with his body or with the numbers of the lows. He didn't feel stronger. So I'd go, listen, we're stripping it down and you're going to do like 5 exercises and you're going to do 1 exercise at a time. This is your goal. I go, do you want to do circuits and be like just aerobically fit, or do you want to get stronger and put on mass? And he was like, I want to get stronger and put on mass. And now that we're a year in, he's like, yeah, my arms are tighter in my shirts, my legs are tighter in the thighs. He's like, but my waist hasn't gotten bigger. So like he's noticing physical changes in his body, and he's noticing stronger lifts. Like he never really deadlifted before. So it was really easy to see progress in the deadlift, because when you've never done it before and then you start doing it with proper form, you're going to see progress. But even like his incline bench went up, his shoulder press went up, and it was all just with like base level programming. We weren't doing anything crazy with his programming, but he was actually loading appropriately, pushing to or near failure, and taking longer rest breaks, which he initially was very bored with. And I think that's something a lot of people get is they were like, they'll message me, clients will be like, I can't believe you want me to rest for 2 minutes. I'm bored out of my mind. I'm like, I need 2 minutes because I'm like gassed. Yeah. And by the end of the 2 minutes, I'm like, God, I'm already up. Like I've already got to start this next set, because I only get like an hour and 10 minutes to work out. So if I take too long of rest breaks, then my kid wakes up and it's a whole mess. But taking an adequate rest break I think is important. If you are working hard enough, you should need that rest break and feel like, thank God I got 2.5 minutes off.
I was thinking that too. That was like the next thing, like making sure you're taking proper rest periods so that you're able to push that load, because whatever you do the first set, you may not be able to mimic the second or third set. And you're wondering why you have to, not do as many reps or go down and load. But if you're not taking proper rest periods, that can make a big difference. But I was also going to mention, I was reading up, I can't remember what it was, but I was reading up on something, and I will try to find it so I can actually like say this is legit. But talking about German volume training, and it just made me think of it, but that there wasn't necessarily some drastic difference in like muscular mass put on from like a 5 by 10 versus a 10 by 10 when in comparison, because at that amount of volume, like if you've never done that much, then like, yes, you'll see gains, but like you just don't have to do it. You can still make massive gains doing 5 sets of 10 that are working hard enough, versus if you have to do 10 sets of 10, your loading has to drop. And so you may get the same stimulus or, similar, but why not just do 5 sets versus trying to pace it out and do 10 sets of 10 and murder yourself? Unless you're just crazy and you like want to do German volume training and like have fun, but
minimum effective dose, right?
Right. Minimal effective dose. I'm all for that. And I'm all for like 2 to 3 minute rest periods. Those are my favorite. If I get down to like 60 seconds, I'm like, I'm going to die. I'm going to pass out.
That could be where we, lead into our next caller or conversation, because I think we've now gotten to the point where we're like, okay, we understand we have to work hard. More isn't necessarily better. Better is better. But how much should I actually be doing, right? So when we talk about volume in general, which would be kind of like the amount of work you're doing, when we talk about intensity in general, which is kind of like how hard you're working within that work, we haven't really talked about it, but there's also another variable called frequency, which is how often you're doing that work. All of those kind of mesh together to find what works best for you in terms of how often should you be working out in general, how many exercises and how many, sets of those exercises should you be doing in those workouts. And all 3 of those things play into each other. It's not just kind of like a more volume is better, less volume is better, higher intensity is better, lower intensity is better. It's kind of like they all affect each other. And so you have to factor them in when you're making that decision for yourself. And each individual person is also different in that sense. So we can't just give like this is exactly how many days you should go to the gym. This is how many sets you should do. It's like, it all depends. But now that we've got an idea of kind of like, okay, you don't need to do a crap ton of work, a crap ton of volume, but you have to be working pretty hard within what you are doing. What does that actually look like? So we can probably talk about that in the next call, the next video that we do. But I think it was good to at least establish that. I think we can all agree the number one reason that people find themselves either spinning their wheels or realizing that, man, I feel like I'm missing something. I'm not getting all of the gains or the results that I want. there might be a disconnect between the effort required to get those results and the effort that you're putting in. Again, not that means anyone's being lazy. There's just a lot of times it's like we're putting a lot of effort into the wrong places, distributing it incorrectly or inefficiently.
Absolutely.
You think, anything else that we want to finish this one up with? I mean, I think that this is at this point long enough for, one, if you've sat through this entire thing, thank you for listening to us ramble. We will probably put some information about level 10 and maybe the three of us and the other coaches that you may or may not see in these videos. We're not only going to be talking about training, we will have other videos about things like gut health, things like fat loss, things like dieting, nutritional. We do it all at level 10. And so we'll put some more information kind of like in the comment section below. But definitely look out for the next kind of part 2 to this one, which will be talking about what should programming look like, how much should I be doing, how often should I be training, and things like that.